Hamas has said there is no point in further peace talks or in a new hostage release deal in Gaza. A senior spokesperson made those comments after Israel's Security Cabinet unanimously approved plans to occupy all of Gaza. Well, joining me now is Dr H. Hellyer, Senior Associate Fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies. That's RUSI. Hello and good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for being with us. Look, what's the international response to this plan from Israel been so far?
It's been quite negative, obviously, because it's not just about a furthering and deepening of the occupation on the ground in Gaza. There's also this, because of course, Gaza has been an occupied territory since 1967. So that hasn't changed, but this is a much wider deepening of the Israeli military presence within the territory. There's that on the one side, but then there's also the issue around the delivering of humanitarian aid, the risk of starvation of large swathes of the Palestinian population in Gaza extremely serious. The United Nations and many international organizations have expressed this very clearly. They're talking about days, maybe weeks, but not much more than that before you have starvation actually being visited upon large parts of the population. And none of this seems to turn for the authorities in Tel Aviv. The idea is that there will be some sort of new quote-unquote aid delivery system, but using, frankly, mercenaries via subcontractors, so not the IDF. So the UN and various international organizations like the Norwegian Red Cross and Red Crescent Refugee Council, they've all said, you know, I think it's the Norwegian Refugee Council. They all said, we refuse to be involved in this. You can't put humanitarian aid into the hands of one of the warring parties. It's got to be impartial. It's got to be on the basis of humanitarian principles. So there's been a resounding opposition. France came out very strongly against the plan, I think earlier on today as well as yesterday, very publicly. There's no support for any of this, but I don't think that's what's going to stop the Israelis from actually put it through anyway.
Well, so look, the Israeli position is obviously that they haven't occupied Gaza since 2005, and at the moment, let me ask the question.
Of this particular point, 2005 is when there was the quote-unquote disengagement of Israel from Gaza. That's what they call it. That's not the end of occupation, and the International Court of Justice, as well as the United Nations, and our own government in the UK have all said it's been occupied territory since.
I understand what you're saying. I'm not making my point. I'm explaining the Israeli position, which is not my position. Okay. The Israeli position is that Gaza has not been occupied since 2005, and that Hamas grew in the vacuum that was left after occupation. The Israeli position is also that there is obviously the lack of aid getting in at the moment could be better handled if there were troops on the ground, if Israel controlled the ground in Gaza. I understand that you disagree with that, and aid.
It's not me who disagrees with that. It's the international community that disagrees with that. It's been the very loud position of not only the UN, but the ICJ, the ICC, and our own government, that this is an occupied territory and has been since 1967, irrespective of 2005. And I appreciate that you're trying to, be quote unquote impartial, but they are the occupying power. We wouldn't really give the Russian view when it comes to occupying parts of Ukraine. It's the occupying power. This is occupied territory. When it comes to the humanitarian aid delivery, of course, again, the way in which the international community has been very, very clear that you cannot use starvation as a tool of war. And you've had very senior UN officials be very clear about this point. And the Israelis being very clear that, no, that's exactly what we intend on doing. We intend on securing, quote unquote, the humanitarian aid and using aid as a way to apply pressure to Hamas. So in other words, collective punishment on the territory writ large. I think we just need to be really clear. This is not a controversial position that is being put forward by myself. This is, the international community.
From Israel's perspective at the moment, what the fact that this conflict has not achieved the aims that Israel wanted it to achieve, which were basically the eradication of Hamas. what other options are open to them at the moment, short of, I mean, because any with aid is not getting in, people are starving there. Israel is responsible for aid not getting in and people starving. And yet when Israel is not on the ground in significant numbers inside Gaza, there is little they can do about that. And also, I mean, Hamas remains there. What pathways forwards are there for Israel that do not involve occupation and do not involve Hamas being able to rebuild and launch the kind of assaults that it has done in the past? What could they be doing?
So let's be clear. There was a ceasefire that was in place that came through in January. But I also want to just frame this properly. Gaza isn't a part of Israel. Gaza is an occupied territory. So in order for there to be progress in a comprehensive fashion, then of course you need to have a track that leads to the end of the occupation of Gaza in order to stabilize the territory and come to some sort of political solution. This is what the government's position has been, the UK government's position has been for quite a long time. Not only the UK, but also the EU, the UN Security Council. You're not going to have a stable situation while the territory continues to be an occupied one by Israel. That's simply not a recipe for any sort of stabilization. What we have instead is the continued re-emphasis by the authorities in Tel Aviv that irrespective of even the return of the hostages, that there will be quote unquote voluntary migration of Palestinians from. Of course, it's not voluntary because you've made the territory uninhabitable. So it's not surprising then that we don't really see much of a vision in terms of coming to some sort of solution here, because the solution is, as far as the Israelis are concerned, to widen and deepen the military occupation on the ground in Gaza and reduce the populations of Palestinians in Gaza.
But I have to ask again, what is a pathway towards a stable situation in Gaza from where we are now? What is a pathway?
So returning to the ceasefire, I mean, this has been stated many times over the past few weeks, over the past couple of months. Remember, the ceasefire had been in place and then was collapsed by the Israelis. Returning to that ceasefire has been the consistent demand of the international community, including our own government, I want to reemphasize, for many weeks now, that if we're going to get to a situation where aid can get in, stability can be restored in some shape or form, then that's the very first. It's not the only step. It's the first step to getting there.
Thank you very much indeed. Dr. H. Hellyer is a Senior Associate Fellow at RUSI. Good to speak to you.